Welcome to We Give an F12, the podcast about IT, managed services, and cybersecurity that makes your business more productive and secure.
Hi everyone, this is Maheen and welcome back to another episode of AI, Cybersecurity, and ROI, Maximizing Tech Investments for Business Growth, presented by Canadian SME and proudly sponsored by F12. In today's episode, we'll be exploring how SMEs can scale their IT infrastructure while keeping cybersecurity at the forefront. And with the rise in cyber threats, businesses must adopt practical strategies to secure their operations. Today, we're joined by Vaughn Male, a Security Operations Analyst at F12.net and based in Edmonton. Vaughn specializes in mitigating risks from the dark web and protecting organizations against underground threats. And with several industry certifications, Vaughn has developed strategies that help businesses protect their sensitive data and defend against emerging cyber risks. So, if you want to boost your IT system or strengthen your cybersecurity, this episode provides actionable insights to protect your business. So let's get started. Vaughn, we're very pleased to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. And we're very excited and looking forward to learn from your expertise. Now, Vaughn, let's begin our discussion by understanding the growing threat landscape for SMEs, because as cybercrime continues to evolve, SMEs are becoming more frequent targets, particularly in the digital age. And with the risk of the dark web, small businesses, they must understand who's behind these attacks and why they're being targeted. So, one, who is primarily targeting Canadian SMEs on the dark web, and what motivates these cybercriminals to go after smaller businesses?
Of course. Canada's Communication Security Establishment, oftentimes called the CSE, they release annual threat reports, and this most recent one actually identifies ransomware as the most prominent threat to Canadian organizations. Usually, or sometimes, these organizations are large, organized groups. They're kind of collectives, and sometimes they're operated by nation states and threat actors, and there's a whole geopolitical side to it. And other times, these threat actors, they're just lone wolves acting on their own. In addition to these ransomware groups are what are called initial access brokers. These are people who are really good at getting access into an organization, getting that initial foothold, and then they will sell it, usually on the dark web, to these other ransomware groups or actors to get what they want. These groups really target Canadian SMEs because they view them as low-hanging fruit. Smaller organizations usually have a weaker security posture, which makes them kind of prime targets for attacks like these. And despite them being smaller, SMEs still house customer data and intellectual property of a really high value. And so it's really critical for Canadian SMEs to recognize that they're not immune to adopt proactive cybersecurity measures. Sorry, they're not immune, and you need to adopt proactive cybersecurity measures to mitigate these risks. These organizations, they're not going to be turned away by how small you are. They're not only looking for large companies, they're looking for anybody vulnerable. This same report also identifies several what are called advanced persistent threats. You'll oftentimes see it written down as APTs that target Canadian organizations and individuals. Regardless of the complexity of these attacks, they try to keep their operations on the dark web to maintain anonymity and to evade capture. They'll use things like onion sites to leak information, dark net marketplaces to sell and exchange the information and tools, and they'll also use hidden services hosted with Tor for all negotiations and communications.
Wow, that's definitely eye-opening one. I mean, due to their limited resources, SMEs are often seen as low-hanging fruit, and this makes it all more important for businesses to stay vigilant and take proactive steps. But what kind of businesses are particularly vulnerable to dark web threats, and how can they better understand the risks they face?
So we've seen them attack across all industry verticals and across all sizes, from micro businesses that might have 10 or less employees all the way up to, and I mean, we've seen in the news these large mega corporations and utilities that are also targeted. In my experience, they really target based off of who is vulnerable. There are ways using things like Shodan and those tools that you can actually search for vulnerable services on the internet. They don't care about your size, your revenue, or your technological complexity. It's prudent to like if you want to stay protected and kind of stay in the know, there are some resources that you can follow to get kind of continuous news and updates. The Canadian Center for Cybersecurity has a presence on social media, and if you don't use that, you can follow them by RSS feed. And other organizations such as CISSA in the United States release really high quality threat intelligence reports. But those ones are really more for a more technical audience. So if you feel like getting down and nerdy, that's those are the ones to follow.
It's really alarming how much attention these cybercriminals are giving to SMEs and listeners as business continues to digitize. The risks from dark web can no longer be ignored. So remember that cybersecurity isn't just about protecting the data, it's also about safeguarding your entire business. So stay ahead of the curve by taking proactive steps today. Now, Vaughn, in our next segment, we'll dive into the types of sensitive information cybercriminals are after and the significant risks associated with the data breach because once cybercriminals have access to our systems, they're often far more than just financial gain. Sensitive data from customer information to intellectual property is highly valuable in underground markets. What specific types of information are cybercriminals targeting on the dark web, and what potential risks do SMEs face if the data is exposed?
Yeah, you kind of hit the really good point there. Is that this data is vulnerable? Sorry, is valuable. This data is valuable, and whether it's directly related to your organization or its operations, or even just your reputation, all of these things do hold direct or indirect value. Common targets really are financial information, customer data, like you mentioned. There's also sensitive records that are protected by privacy regulations that we have here in Canada, like PIPEDA, which people really don't want to have out there because then you can suffer legal repercussions. And this will be things like your employees' social insurance numbers, addresses, and then of course they want to target your intellectual property. So those are things that you've developed internally to kind of really make sure that your business is able to function.
Mhm.
In some cases, I have seen these attackers exfiltrate, which is the term that we use for them stealing data, is exfiltration. But we've seen them steal personal data. This will be things like family vacation photos and divorce records. In some cases, these tactics will exploit emotional value as opposed to like
Yeah.
their direct financial value, because you're more likely to pay to recover a cherished memory or to prevent some kind of personal embarrassment rather than simply protecting customer data. Everybody's motivated by different things. And these actors often aim to make the attack feel personal because really what they use is fear to maximize their own profits.
Mhm.
Some of the threat actors that I mentioned before were like nation states or APTs. They have much more complex motivations. So they might target your organizations simply to gather intelligence, to steal intellectual property, or to exploit customer information for larger
Right.
scale social engineering campaigns later on. And even recently, we've seen them target SMEs due to their geographic proximity to their actual targets. These types of attacks can be really dangerous because they erode your competitive edge and they can expose your organization to risks on a global stage as opposed to just in the region or industry that you normally operate in.
hmm It's really shocking to hear how far reaching the consequences of a data breach can be, like from financial losses to damaged reputation. And the stakes are so high, and every business should be prepared for the worst. But let's talk about how to overcome from something like this. One, how can SMEs protect sensitive information properly, especially in areas like customer data and financial records?
This is a really good question, and I don't think we have enough time to kind of for me to just rattle off acronyms about all the different technology stacks that exist for protecting data, because there's a really broad range of processes and technologies that can protect your data, which like can make this, if you're trying to answer this on your own and you don't have a thorough background in this, it can seem really daunting to just even get started on research because there's so much. If you're just starting out in your cybersecurity journey as an organization, the best thing you can do is to actually ensure that what we call the principle of least privilege is being applied. This makes it much. This is much easier said than done, but what your goal is to ensure that your data is correctly categorized and to make sure that only those that require the access can actually access that data. So that'll be making sure that, for instance, your HR documents aren't accessible to the entire organization, and only the people that need access to payroll information or work in HR actually do have access to that. This drastically reduces an organization's attack surface by limiting just the number of accounts that can access that data. And it also allows you to inventory the data, allowing you to better assess the risk that that data being stolen poses to your organization, and kind of poises you to be in a really good position to advance more advanced security measures later on, like DLP and all of these more complex tools that come out later. If you're unequipped with internal resources to complete a task like this, it does help to engage third parties. There are a large number of different organizations. You can pull in an MSSP like F12, or you can pull in a consultancy that has VCIO services to really assist you with this whole process.
There's no doubt that the risk of data exposure is far greater than most SMEs realize, but taking the proper precautions can make all the difference. Now, listeners, while the dark web may seem like an intimidating and distant threat, it's something that every SME must monitor. Whether you're a small startup or a growing enterprise, these threats are so real and they affect everyone. So please stay informed and stay prepared. Now, Juan, in our next segment, we'll explore why Canadian SMEs should care about the dark web and how can they protect themselves from threats. Um, how many SMEs believe that dark web is something that only large corporations need to worry about? However, even smaller businesses can be taught in its web if they don't take action. So, why should Canadian SMEs be concerned about what's happening on the dark web and how can it directly impact their business operations?
Yeah, so there used to be a saying I remember growing up where they would say that, oh, our lives are becoming more and more digital. And sometimes I hear people still echo that. I think we're all kind of in agreement now that we've moved beyond that. We're already fully immersed in a digital world. Everything that we do, from filing taxes to connecting with friends and family, almost every aspect of our lives happens on the internet using these digital tools. Many of the services we rely on, things like LinkedIn or H&R Block, have suffered costly data breaches. For many Canadians, this means that both personal and professional information is actually already exposed on the dark web. This data often ends up being sold and distributed, which puts it in the hands of people that you don't have direct control over. With enough determination, these threat I'm going to start that one over.
No
Uh,
worries.
with enough determination, these threat actors can piece together details like usernames, passwords, things like where you live, what you enjoy, and they can also piece together things like your mother's maiden name, the name of your oldest cousin, and all of these security questions that we're so used to answering.
Mhm.
Armed with this information, they can use this to actually violate the digital spaces where you live and work. This leads to financial loss, identity theft, and damage to your overall reputation.
Mhm. Those are excellent points, Juan. And the dark web, it is much more accessible to cyber criminals than most people think. And the damage can be irreversible once the sensitive information is on there. But what are some signs that SME might be a target of dark web activity, and how can they start monitoring for those potential breaches?
Yeah, there's actually a free website out there called haveibeenpwned.com, which allows you to actually check your email address against a large list of currently known data breaches that have been posted online. You can check this manually, and you can also sign up to be notified if they pick up new activity and new breaches. This is great for monitoring your personal accounts, where you might only have 2 or 3 email addresses at the very most. But it's really difficult to manage at scale for an entire organization. So if you're a business leader or an IT leader, and what you need to do is look into more corporate dark web monitoring services.
Mhm.
There are many, many of them that exist. There's lots of cyber threat intelligence analysts out there, or CTI analysts that are doing fantastic work. And they're like what one that you would really want to look into if you are looking to get dark web monitoring services as a feature that not all of them have is one that can actually offer your supply chain monitoring. So you can put in organizations that you work very closely with or partners so that when they suffer a compromise, you're actually also notified. So you can actually even monitor kind of the periphery of your organization's infrastructure.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, staying ahead of dark web activities is crucial for SMEs at this point to avoid, the fallout from a breach. And it's not just about protecting data; it's about safeguarding their reputation as well. Next up, we'll discuss actionable steps SMEs can take to protect themselves from these growing threats. Because now that we understand the risks posed by dark web, it's time to talk about some solutions. And I feel like SMEs must adopt practical and cost-effective strategies to protect their digital assets without really breaking the bank. So, one, what are the most effective and affordable cybersecurity strategies that SMEs can implement to defend themselves from the dark web threats?
Yeah, that's a really good point. SMEs usually have much lower resources. They don't have deep pockets like these large kind of mega corporations you normally hear about that suffer from these compromises. The best way, and usually the most affordable way, is to try to prevent these from even occurring. So by having a strong cybersecurity posture, um, including practical steps such as training staff to recognize and respond to threats early, kind of to prevent those initial access brokers from getting any access whatsoever. Implementing multi-factor authentication at every entry point into where you house data, and restricting data access to only those who need it with the principle of least privilege that we were talking about earlier. Additionally, regularly patch all systems and hardware and replace anything that doesn't support security updates anymore. This can be relatively inexpensive if you have internal IT resources that can deploy and maintain this. However, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity has actually published a Get Cyber Safe guide for small businesses. It's available on their website. This provides an excellent baseline for keeping your business secure and kind of preventing these attacks, because responding to them afterwards, especially if you're cost conscious, is very, very expensive. There are a lot of things that go into it, lawyers, and you need to hire a specialized technical team. So anything you can do to prevent a breach is ideal. For organizations that don't have existing measures or resources to kind of handle this in-house, either you don't have an internal IT team or they're very, very short-staffed, engaged a managed security service provider, oftentimes abbreviated as MSSP, um, can be it's a really smart option in those cases. They can assist with critical areas like vulnerability management, monitoring, log retention, and normalization that can get really, really complex later on. But they are really essential to ensuring your business is protected and ready to respond to evolving threats.
Wow. Now, securing a business, it doesn't have to be costly. You're right. Simple steps like strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, it can make a big difference. Um, Next up, we'll cover what to do if you suspect that your data has been compromised. Because despite taking all these precautions that we've discussed today, one, sometimes data does get compromised, and when that happens, knowing what steps to take can minimize the damage and help businesses recover quickly. So, what should an SME do if it suspects that its data has been exposed on the dark web, and how can it investigate and contain the breach?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that for anyone that does find themselves in this situation. It can be really, really scary. Um, if your dark web monitoring has flagged your username and password being used or being exposed on the dark web, first step really is just to change that password immediately. Be sure to update your credentials on every single platform and make sure that you're using MFA everywhere that you can. If financial data is involved, you want to, like your personal credit card or something like that, you want to monitor your credit closely. And if you believe that credit cards have been compromised or stolen, you want to cancel them right away and just get a new credit card number and all that stuff. It's
Hmm.
very painful and inconvenient. If a vendor or a partner has been compromised and you suspect that your data was stolen in that attack, you want to inventory what information they're housing, uh, and usually they'll disclose kind of what types of data were stolen. And then you want to assess the risk that it may pose to your organization. And finally, if you suspect a more direct attack, whether it's kind of a breach in your network or you've actually found ransomware encrypting your files, it's really critical to seek professional help. Unfortunately, we don't really have enough time today to guide you through a really complex incident response like that. But I would recommend that you reach out to a managed security service provider, like I mentioned before, which can be F12 or anybody else, or an incident response firm that your cybersecurity insurance provider may refer you to. This can implement a comprehensive incident response plan. They'll help identify the source of the attack. They'll secure any vulnerabilities that they find. They'll perform a root cause analysis to kind of ensure that this doesn't happen again. And additionally, you can collaborate with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity for additional support. They will take your report of a breach and they'll maybe ask for some details, some information, and they'll have some resources that can assist you. Another thing that I'd like to highlight for anybody in that situation is that if you're a business leader or IT leader, this is probably going to be one of the most complex situations that you're going to deal with in your tenure. And trying to handle it alone can be extremely overwhelming and frustrating. So do not hesitate to ask for help.
You're right. I mean, quick action is key in data breach, and having an incident response plan can help mitigate the damage. Juan, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show today. Any final piece of advice for our listeners before we let you go?
Just to be safe and to stay aware and try and keep up with how quickly things are developing in this field because it really changes daily.
hmm Thank you so much, Juan, for your insights into the dark web and the practical cybersecurity strategies that you have shared with us. Thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
And listeners, today we learned that Canadian SMEs must remain vigilant in the face of growing cyber threats, particularly from the dark web. Juan shared actionable steps businesses can take to protect their sensitive data, from using strong passwords to implementing multi-factor authentication and having an incident response plan in place. So we'd like to thank Juan for his time and expertise today. And of course, a special thank you to F12 for sponsoring this episode. Their support helps us bring valuable insights to businesses across Canada. And to our listeners, please don't forget to visit CanadianSME.ca and subscribe to the magazine for more insights and tools to empower your business. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, stay secure and elevate your business.